You ever just stop and wonder why there's anything? Why this whole universe, this world, this reality, instead of just, well, nothing? It's probably one of the biggest questions you can even ask. And today, we're going to unpack a really classic philosophical argument that tries to tackle that question head on.
I mean, really think about it for a second. The device you're watching this on, the chair you're sitting in, heck, even our entire planet, everything we see has a kind of shelf life, right? It all had a beginning and it's all going to have an end. So, if everything is just temporary, where did it all come from in the first place? Okay, so the argument for how we might answer that big question, it actually starts with a really simple but powerful observation about the world. It gives a specific name to all these temporary things we just talked about, and that name is contingent.
So what does that even mean, contingent? Well, a contingent thing is basically anything that didn't always exist and it won't exist forever. Its existence isn't guaranteed, It depends on something else to be here. In other words, it's contingent.
And this idea, it applies to pretty much everything you can think of, from the smallest stuff to the biggest. A person, a tree, a house, even a mountain. But let's think bigger. Entire planets, stars, whole galaxies, they were all formed by something that came before them, and eventually they're all going to change or disappear. The key takeaway here is that nothing we can see or touch is permanent. And that realization, that simple observation, it leads us right to the heart of this huge puzzle. If everything we see is temporary, just another link in a long chain of events, it kind of forces you to ask, well, where does the chain even begin?
Exactly. If the entire universe, the whole shebang, is just one massive collection of these contingent things, what kicked it all off? What's the original source for everything?
All right, so this is where we shift from just wondering about this stuff to looking at a formal argument. It's a chain of logic, and it's designed to lead us to what it claims is a totally unavoidable conclusion. So let's break down the steps together. Okay, let's walk through this. Step 1 is pretty simple. Temporary things don't just pop into existence out of thin air, right? They need a cause. Step 2 is also super important. Nothing can create itself. To create yourself, you'd have to exist before you existed, which makes no sense. So those first 2 steps create this long chain of cause and effect. But here's the kicker, the really crucial point. That chain can't just go back forever and ever. And you might ask, why not? Well, think about it. If the chain of causes went back infinitely, there would be no first cause to get the whole thing started. Nothing would ever begin to exist in the first place.
So if an infinite chain of these temporary causes just doesn't work logically, then the argument says there has to be a different kind of cause, a first source, one that isn't like anything else in that chain.
And this is where we get this really cool contrast between 2 types of existence. On one side, you've got everything we've been talking about, the contingent being. You can think of it like a domino. It falls over, but only because another domino hit it. Its state depends on something else. But on the other side, the argument proposes there has to be a necessary being. This is something that doesn't depend on a cause. It exists simply by its own nature. It's not a domino. It's the finger that pushed the first domino. It's the ultimate foundation for everything.
So this necessary being is the logical end of the line. It doesn't need a cause because its very nature is to exist. It's uncaused, it's unending, it's completely self-sufficient. And yeah, this is the concept that a lot of philosophical and religious traditions would call God or Ishwar.
And so, after following that whole chain of logic, we land on this really powerful conclusion. To avoid that whole paradox of an endless chain of dominoes with no one to push the first one, the argument demands that a being must exist that is not itself contingent, but is the cause for all contingent things.
Okay, I know this can feel a little heady, a bit abstract, so let's use a really simple, everyday analogy that I think makes this whole chain of logic click into place.
All right, just picture a single light bulb lit up in a dark room. That light exists, right? But its existence is totally dependent on something else. It's a contingent fact. So why is the bulb lit? Well, it's getting electricity from a wire. And where's that wire getting its juice? From a generator at a power plant. See, it's a really clear chain of cause and effect. But now, here comes the big question. What if there was no power plant? What if that wire just kept going and going forever, connected to another wire, which was connected to another wire, and so on, with no ultimate source of power at the beginning? The answer's pretty obvious, isn't it? The bulb would be dark. It wouldn't matter if you had a million miles of wire. Without that foundational power source, that necessary source of energy, the whole system just doesn't work. The light could never, ever turn on. So let's bring it all home. Let's recap the core logic of this entire argument one last time, just to make sure it's all crystal clear.
Okay, so here it is in a nutshell. First, we look around and see that the world is filled with temporary, contingent things. Next, we realize all those contingent things need a cause. Then, we hit that crucial point. An infinite, never-ending chain of those causes just isn't logically possible. And that leads us to the final conclusion. There must be a first uncaused cause, a necessary being that got the whole show started.
And that leaves us with a pretty profound question to chew on, doesn't it? If this age-old argument actually holds water, what does that mean for us? For our own temporary, contingent lives? What does it mean to exist in a universe that might just be grounded in something eternal and necessary? That's a question philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries, and now it's a question for you to think about.